76 people are killed after a plane carrying a Brazilian football team crashes in Colombia. The charter aircraft came down in weather so heavy, rescuers suspended their search. Just 5 are thought to have survived. Also this lunchtime, the chairman of the Football Association accepts he can't say for certain whether the game has rid itself of sex abusers.
I don't think we can ever say things are clean, because our job is to be paranoid about the safety of children in our game.
The Prime Minister pushes forward with plans to force firms to publish pay gaps. And help for hedgehogs. Animal shelters are inundated with hoglets, born too late to survive the winter chill.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Ranveer Singh.
Good afternoon. It was a flight full of excitement and expectation. Among the 81 people on board the charter plane was a team of professional footballers from Brazil headed for the final of an international competition. Their rags to riches story is romantic as Leicester City's, but this lunchtime it has come to a tragic end. At least 76 of those on board have died, including the majority of the team, as the aircraft crashed in bad weather. Brazil has declared 3 days of national mourning. The aircraft was travelling from Sao Paulo. It had stopped in Bolivia and was on the second leg of its journey at the time it lost contact with air traffic control, 20 miles from its destination, Medellin Airport. Neil Connery has the latest.
In the darkness, rescue teams desperately search for survivors at the scene of the Colombian plane crash. The flight was chartered by a top Brazilian football team. It was carrying 81 people when it crashed on its approach to Medellin. Among those killed, players and staff from the Chapecoense club. Police say there were a handful of survivors, among them 2 of the club's players, including defender Alan Rochelle. He was taken to hospital along with a journalist and one of the flight crew. This was the Chapecoense squad just before takeoff. They were heading for the biggest match in the club's history to play in one of South America's most important competitions. On board, the players' excitement was clear to see. This small club entered Brazil's top division for the first time 2 years ago. In the wake of the crash, the South American Football Confederation has now said it's suspending all activities as a mark of respect. An investigation is underway into what caused the crash, which happened during bad weather.
Accessing the crash site has been incredibly difficult due to inclement weather. They've had to suspend the operations up near the crash site now because it's just too difficult after days of incredibly heavy rains to get to the crash, to get to the area where the plane went down.
In Brazil, flags at the country's Football Association headquarters have been lowered to half-mast as the impact of this tragedy is felt far and wide. At the crash site, work has resumed to retrieve the bodies of those killed. A flight which had started with so much hope and expectation, ending in the most tragic of circumstances. Neil Connery, ITV News.
Here, the chairman of the Football Association has said he can't rule out whether allegations of historical sex abuse were ignored or covered up by his predecessors. But Greg Clark says he's determined to be open about how the FA deals with the fallout now, in the wake of so many former players claiming they were abused as children by their coaches. 5 police forces are now investigating the growing scandal. Sally Lockwood has more.
For almost 2 weeks, the FA has been under the spotlight. But for decades, children shouldered the dark secret they were allegedly abused as youth players. Now, as adults, they found the courage to speak out. And today, the FA's chairman responded publicly.
I don't know if there's a cover-up or not. I really don't know. I suspect that, like many big problems, people aren't drawn towards them. My methodology is as if there's a problem, run towards it. Embrace it, fix it, disclose everything that happened. I think institutionally, all organisations in the old days used to protect themselves by keeping quiet and closing ranks. That's completely inappropriate and unacceptable today, which is why we've had an independent-led inquiry.
More than 20 former players have now spoken to the Professional Footballers Association over allegations of child sex abuse. The NSPCC's special hotline has received more than 250 calls, and the allegations are now being investigated by 5 separate police forces. Stories of horrific abuse by former football coach Barry Bonnell are at the centre of this scandal. It's understood the convicted paedophile is still in hospital in Stevenage after paramedics responded to what police are calling a fear for welfare incident on Friday night. Former Manchester City youth player Chris Unsworth claims he was subjected to years of sexual abuse by Bennell from the age of 9. And even 35 years on, he's now waiting to give evidence.
I just feel very angry about the police. There's people's lives at risk because of him, and I'm here waiting for an interview off the police that hopefully the more people that they interview, the sooner we can get him rearrested.
Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sports.
And today Parliament responded to these harrowing accounts, including details of the inquiry being carried out by the FA.
The internal review will look at what the FA and clubs knew and when, and what action was or should have been taken.
Meanwhile, the FA chairman responded to questions about the current safety of the game.
I don't think we can ever say things are clean, because our job is to be paranoid about the safety of children in our game. Every year we need to assume bad things are happening.
While attitudes towards child sex abuse may have changed, it seems for decades truly horrific things were happening that are only coming to light now. Sally Lockwood, ITV News.
Our sports correspondent Ian Payne is at Wembley. And Ian, I know you've spent the morning with the FA's chairman. What more has he been saying?
Well, Ranveer, basically he's been trying to reassure everybody that they will do everything in their power to investigate every allegation of historical child abuse. They won't leave any stone unturned. He's also talked about the speed of the inquiry, because there have been suggestions that they've been dragging their feet. He says that's not necessarily the case. They're going as fast as they can, and as soon as they know anything and they're allowed to tell the public, they will do so. He's also been talking about the QC who's heading up the investigation. There have been suggestions that she won't be neutral because she's worked for the FA before. He says no, she's worked for the FA, which means she knows how we work, but also she's worked against us as well, so he's got no concerns in that direction. He's also described this scandal as one of the biggest in the FA's history, and as you've heard, he couldn't rule out that there had been a cover-up in the 1980s and the 1990s. He says he's very angry. The other thing to say is this is very unusual territory for a football organisation or a sports organisation, so he's going to be taking advice from a senior policeman who knows about this subject tomorrow.
Ian, thank you. Meanwhile, the former darts world champion Eric Bristow has lost his role with Sky Sports after suggesting that football abuse victims are not proper men. He made the comments on Twitter yesterday, openly questioning why victims did not, and I quote, sort out their abusers, again quote, when they got older and fitter. A spokesperson for the broadcaster said they would not be using him in future. Well, as the sports world comes to terms with the allegations of historical abuse, today the Department for Education took steps to preventing similar problems in England's schools. It follows a report that suggests girls in particular are subjected to sexism every single day. As a result, Ofsted is to ask inspectors to request school records detailing any harassment or bullying within a school. There will be a survey of teachers so the government can get a clear indication of the scale of the problem, and schools are to get clearer definitions of what exactly is considered as sexual harassment and when it is appropriate to get the police involved. I'm joined now by MP Maria Miller, who is the chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee. Good afternoon to you in Westminster, and head teacher Dr. Susan Tranter from Edmonton County School. Good evening to both of you. Maria Miller, let me just turn to you first. This is interesting about the definition of what it means, and one wonders that there is goodwill amongst teachers, of course, to do the best for their children, and nobody wants this to happen. But nobody really knows where the line is, perhaps.
Well, I think we found very clearly in our inquiry that teachers do want more help in how they can tackle this. But there are very clear laws already in place, and schools should be taking this very seriously. I'm heartened by the government's response today, because I think it does show that they understand the seriousness of this problem, but my committee wants to see not just words, a little bit more action in terms of really holding schools to account.
And you kicked this off a few months ago, didn't you? I mean, it's a sort of a passion of yours, I imagine. And just give me some detail, if you have it, of the kind of things that girls were saying sort of had become normal in school and still is sort of accepted, but shouldn't be.
Well, the evidence that we took in the committee included evidence directly from young people themselves, and it was quite stark that many of them felt that it was quite routine to hear language like slut, whore, slag being used on a peer-to-peer basis every day, for girls to have to experience their skirts being pulled up, their bums being slapped. I mean, things that none of us would accept in the workplace, but children are accepting in schools, and schools should be places of learning, not places where sexual assaults are feared.
Indeed. Dr. Susan Tranter, Edmonton County School, you feel that actually the framework that we've got at the moment, there's enough scope in it to deal with it. What do you do at your school?
I think one of the most important things that we do is that we accept that these kind of things do go on. Edmonton County School is one of London's largest schools. It's full of lots of teenagers with lots of hormones.
What do you do? Yeah, what do you tell the girls and boys about?
But we have a rule in our school, is that you keep your hands and feet to yourself. And we also educate both the boys and the girls on the way in which they should relate to one another, and that sexist behaviour is wrong and it shouldn't be tolerated by anyone. And if they report it, that's something will be done about it.
And that you take full notes, do you? Because it seems that there's a real inconsistency in schools in England about how they make notes about harassment and what they do with it, whether it's just a quiet word to the child or whether it's actually taken down as an official, complaint, if you like.
Well, we make a record of all the things that go on, and we treat it very, very seriously, and we take very firm action with young people if they are responsible for sexist behaviour.
Yeah, it was interesting.
It's completely unacceptable.
Before we came on air, you said that the taxi driver said, actually, this sort of language is just banter, isn't it?
Yes, he just said it was
and
banter.
It's a cultural issue, you're saying. OK, thanks so much for bringing this to light this afternoon, and thank you to Maria Miller in Westminster too. Elsewhere in the news today, European leaders have reacted with shock after a set of papers were photographed outside Downing Street, apparently suggesting Britain wanted to have its cake and eat it over Brexit. The government has denied the notes represented its policy. Our political correspondent Paul Brando is at Downing Street for us. Paul, not official policy, but still very embarrassing.
Absolutely. The government has insisted it's not going to provide a running commentary on Brexit, but now that one has effectively been walked up Downing Street, our European friends aren't reacting particularly well to what they've been able to read. Just to remind you what was in these notes, taken down by an aide to the Conservative MP, Mark Field, who'd had a meeting at the Brexit department yesterday. She'd written that our model for Brexit was to have our cake and eat it. She noted down, though, that we were unlikely to be offered access to the single market, and on a transitional deal to smooth our exit from the single market, she noted that the government was loath to do it. It is the have our cake and eat it comments that are particularly upsetting our European allies. When French MEP said our cake preferences aren't in Article 50, while the Maltese Prime Minister has said today that actually whatever we get out of the EU, it will have to be worse than what we've got at the moment.
We, for one, want a fair deal for the United Kingdom, but it cannot be a superior deal to what membership is. It has to be inferior to what membership is.
Well, the government's insisting that these notes weren't taken by a government minister or official. They don't reflect government policy. The Prime Minister's spokesman told me today they didn't even come up at Cabinet this morning, but he didn't deny this meeting took place. And, there is a sign in all the numbers here at number 10 saying, are your documents covered up? And in this case, they didn't just reveal a few notes. They potentially revealed the government's negotiating hand.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Paul Brand at Downing Street. Still to come, a winter's worry as animal shelters see a huge rise in baby hedgehogs caught in the cold. And a change on the menu, why cheddar cheese is losing its popularity. Big businesses could be forced to publish pay details of its executives under new government plans. The move follows widespread public anger over BHS, which collapsed after being sold by Sir Philip Green for £1, with the loss of thousands of jobs and leaving company pensioners facing an uncertain future. Olivia Kinsley explains.
When BHS collapsed, its former owner, Sir Philip Green, was branded the unacceptable face of capitalism. MPs said the company's demise showed how bosses get rich at the expense of ordinary people. Now it looks like the catalyst for government proposals intending to stop that.
Everyone knows that there are a large number of companies that may not be listed on the stock exchange but employ a lot of people. And so the question is whether the standards of corporate governance that apply to those listed companies should apply to the most significant private companies.
Chief executives in the country's top 100 companies earn an average of £5.5 million. That's up 10% in a year. Meanwhile, the average full-time worker's pay is £28,000, up 2% from 2015. Companies could now be forced to publish the difference in remuneration between their highest and lowest earners, while workers could have a say in bosses' pay.
I think it's quite encouraging. It's a consultation paper. There are no guarantees here. But the moves on publishing pay ratios, getting shareholders to vote, binding votes on pay packages, and also the employee voice in the remuneration committee, it's all steps in the right direction.
Please welcome the Prime Minister.
Her plans don't include forcing companies to put workers on their boards. Theresa May made that pledge during her prime ministerial campaign, but then unannounced it in front of business leaders a week ago.
This is not about mandating works councils or the direct appointment of workers or trade union representatives on boards.
Needing to keep business alongside is forcing Theresa May to move more tentatively than many hoped for. Olivia Kinsley, ITV News.
Well, our business editor, Joel Hills, is here. You could be forgiven for being a bit confused about exactly what Theresa May really does want.
Yeah, a voice on the board, not a seat on the board no longer. There's a U-turn there. But look, don't dismiss this document entirely. This is an age-old problem. I remember Richard Lambert, the former Director General of the CBI, telling the bosses he represented in 2010 that if pay continued to soar in the way that it did, they risked being seen as if they were in another galaxy to everyone else. And since then, the problem's actually got worse. Two ideas here. Forcing bosses to disclose their pay relative to the average member of their staff, that has potentially a humiliation effect, an embarrassment effect that can be pretty powerful. Don't dismiss that as nothing. Secondly, the binding shareholder votes in theory empowers shareholders. My only point that I'd make is that this is not necessarily a burning issue with shareholders. Pay revolts are actually pretty rare. We saw one at BP, we saw one at Anglo-American in the last 12 months. This may outrage the public, but executive pay is not something shareholders tend to care about. I think the overarching thing, though, is really interesting. In the context of BHS, the government is clearly trying to hold private unlisted companies, not the PLCs, to higher account.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Joel. Staying with business, the telecoms giant BT has been told it must legally separate from its UK broadband network Openreach. After a legal battle with the Ofcom regulator, BT is being punished for failing to address competition concerns. Ofcom believes it will lead to better broadband services across the UK. Now, wildlife rescue centres say they're struggling to cope with the number of hedgehogs being brought in. Milder weather has led to later births and the babies are too young to survive winter hibernation. Rupert Evelyn is at a wildlife rescue centre in Yate in Gloucestershire. They are very cute, but it is a problem.
It's definitely a problem. In fact, all bar one of the cages at this rescue centre have got a hedgehog in them. Yvonne Cox has taken one of the hedgehogs out for us, but it's been an incredibly busy autumn for you. What has changed this year?
I think there's been a few occasions, a few different things. One is the winter arrived early. October was very cold, so I think that had a factor. You know, mum hedgehogs went into hibernation early, has left the youngsters. Food dries up in the winter months. There's no insects around, so the little hoglets struggle to find food. No immunity from mum's milk either, so they're very vulnerable. So they start to be found out in the day. People now are educated to the fact that hedgehogs shouldn't be out in the day, and certainly that small hedgehogs need to be brought in because hedgehogs need to be between 500-600 grams to hibernate.
And how can people tell if there is a hedgehog with a problem in their garden or they spot one outside?
Well, generally if they're small. So if the hedgehog, if you put the hedgehog on your hand, if its sort of bottom and nose overlaps the length of your hand, it's probably big enough. But it does need to have a nice big round bottom. It needs to have a Dawn French bottom, not a Victoria Beckham bottom. And then it's okay. But if it's very pinched bottom, then it's probably starving as well. So again, that would need to be brought in. hedgehogs out in the day are generally in trouble. They're nocturnal creatures. If they're not out at night time, then they're usually in trouble being out in the day.
All right, Yvonne, well, thank you very, very much for explaining that to us. If there is an upside to all of this, that yes, there are a lot of hedgehogs being rescued. The good news is they come to places like this, they are fed up and give more food, and then they're released back into the wild. But of course, there is a wider issue of the amount of hedgehogs dwindling, and that is another concern.
Yes, slightly confused over the Victoria Beckham bottom that was referred to, but we shall leave it there. Thanks, Rupert. And finally, it seems cheese lovers' loyalty is shifting. Sales of cheddar cheese have plummeted by more than £60 million over the last year. But blue cheese sales and cheaper alternatives have soared. Sadie Biddulph has more on the smelly sensation.
From Babybel to Brie and Edam to Pont-l'Evêque. As a nation, we love cheese. But the way we are eating and buying it is changing.
The cheese market in the UK is worth £2.75 billion a year, and cheddar is the supreme king, accounting for half of all sales. But over the past 12 months, we've been buying cheaper, unbranded cheddar, so supermarket-owned labels, meaning the cheddar market has dropped from £1.4 billion a year to £1.38 billion.
And trading down is only part of the picture. Away from the supermarkets, our appetite for new cheeses is growing, a desire for bigger and bolder flavours.
You'll always get people who'll come in for the staples, so cheddar, brie, camembert, roquefort, Stilton, but there are people who are becoming more adventurous and they're wanting to try different cheeses, so they may not be blue lovers, so they're wanting to try blues. Wash rind cheeses, which are strong, pungent cheeses, they're wanting to try as well.
With many of us reaching for a cheese board at Christmas, cheddar should hold its own till the end of the year. But come 2017, could trendy blues and goats mean hard cheese for our dairy staple? Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
But it's made you hungry. That's it from us. I'll be back with Mark later at 6:30. See you then.